Hello, you're watching the Trews with me, Russell Brand, and Brad Evans, the doctor, the philosopher. All right, Brad.
Hello.
We want to use this opportunity of the sad suicide of Chris Cornell, former frontman of Soundgarden and Audioslave, to talk about, male suicide, because I suppose that Chris Cornell committed suicide in what you'd have to call middle age, which is the fastest growing bracket within which suicides are occurring. What does if anything, does this say about our society? What does the growth of suicides in this age range say about society? And what can we learn from this, and how can we have a more valuable and relevant conversation around this issue?
Yeah, well, I think suicide is something very similar to death. It's something we don't actually like to talk about as a society, and it often takes a certain celebrity to actually bring it to the fore of public discussion, whereas we know in terms of the statistics you mentioned, it is actually a much wider problem in terms of affecting a lot of people. Now, it seems almost unfathomable actually to people who are living and feel like their lives are kind of okay. Why would a person go ahead with this act and go ahead with this kind of decision? And obviously, there's a great deal of complexity around suicide, but one of the things which we need to maybe ask much more rigorously is not just the individual act of suicide, but how can we understand the social and the political dimensions to suicide, such that it doesn't simply become this individual pathologization, and how can we understand the much broader forces which drive a person to actually commit what seems to be almost unthinkable.
When it is the third largest cause of death in young males, you're right. It can no longer be regarded from the perspective of individual pathology. It becomes a social phenomena. But I suppose it's like when thinking about Chris Cornell's death, I think about what times in my own life have I thought about suicide? What do I have in common with Chris Cornell? How can I begin to understand that mindset? I know he's a man that had struggled with alcoholism and addiction. And whilst I believe he was clean at the time of his death, I suppose it's from a personal perspective that I look at it. I'm always concerned when there's a suicide from someone that's kind of like Chris Cornell's a person that had lived a sort of, one might imagine, a fulfilling life, a successful life. So, what does it say about success in those terms? That it still delivers ultimately that conclusion.
Well, if we look at the problem of suicide, I don't know the context of this particular case, but if we looked at suicide more broadly as a political problem, how can we link it, first of all, in terms of a certain crisis of subjectivity, in terms of what does it mean to be masculine, right? And there's this shift in terms of the understanding of masculinity. Society says that you have to conform to a certain model. It's very much almost like a militaristic, very machoistic model of what it means to be an authentic male. And then, of course, like everybody, if you have internal traumas, internal senses of vulnerability, that can be deeply isolated. It can be deeply, you can retreat actually back into yourself and have these vicious conversations with yourself where you become, I guess, racked up with internal questions of self-doubt. But beyond that, once we kind of think about it much more broadly, then it raises much more difficult questions about not only is it linked to a crisis of subjectivity, but it's actually linked to the crisis of society more generally, where the dreams we are sold, even when we achieve them, appear illusionary. And how can we account for that real myopic sense of, even though I was meant to be living in a future utopia, and actually even though I've got all this material enrichment, it still looks very dystopic to me. So how can I make sense of that?
I suppose suicide or addiction or mental illness does imply that there is some sort of comparison that you're making inside your own head. Like when I've felt depressed or suicidal, I think a component of it has been, my life shouldn't be like this. I should not feel this way. It should feel different to this. Now, evidently, when there's someone who's sort of mentally ill and reaches a point where I can't cope with being alive anymore, I can no longer tolerate these feelings. That that seems to me sort of unimaginable, even as a person that's experienced suicidal feelings. One of the things that surprised me about this is that experts say that roughly half the people that commit suicide decide to do it within an hour of the act, and it's often not preceded by any warning signs. That strikes me as extraordinary, and perhaps, like you've said, Brad, that people are just generally having an experience of life that doesn't relate to what you think life's going to be, that you're not the kind of man that you imagine you're supposed to be, that the things that life has delivered to you, whether it's commercial success or lack of success, that you feel alienated, lost, and that there's not a way out. That's one component, that your life doesn't match up on the inside to your own expectations. And the other component surely must be a lack of communication. Like, I think that one of the things that saved me is, as a person that, like, in recovery, I am part of a community of people that are also in recovery. So when I think like, oh my God, I'm not good enough, what's the point, I can't go on, I've been indoctrinated to pick up the phone, to make a phone call, or to reach out physically. I don't stay on my own in my own head, because I know it's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, and how can we create those conditions where we can have a conversation where you can actually say sometimes it's okay not to be okay, right? That, you know, all of us in our lives, we're not on a plain state of emotional happiness, and that never exists. We all have ups and downs in our life, sometimes for completely inexplicable reasons. We can wake up one day and we just simply don't feel ourselves, and we just don't feel happy with the world, and something is not quite right. But how can we create the conditions where these issues, that we have an internal sense of vulnerability, an internal sense of our own insecurities, is not actually demonized or not actually seen as a bad thing, and as you say, that allows us to have a more fruitful conversation around what does it mean to be vulnerable in this condition, but also the ways in which then that connects to broader critiques around the ways in which society itself says this is what you need to do to feel happy. And because we know the ways in which we are sold to feel happy is very consumerist.
Yes.
And those consumer gratifications last as quick as the purchase before you go outside, and then you buy a new coat and it rains, and then that gratification's gone. You know, so how do we create a new sense of a politics of feeling which is much more affirmative and also takes very seriously, you know, this question of human vulnerability, which all of us experience, some obviously not to the point of suicide, but that vulnerability is there for everybody.
So we have to start looking for contentment in different places. We have to look very carefully at the model that we're pursuing. If you're looking for contentment, for example, in a relationship or through personal success or from consuming objects, it's unlikely that you're to be fulfilled. And I suppose also we need to look at our ability to communicate honestly and openly with each other. Now, look, sadly, I'm approaching the age group, I'm not there yet, thank God, 45 to 64, where I'm approaching the most at-risk category. So I suppose I've got to learn to talk openly about my feelings. Some would say I've talked too openly about it. I feel all right today. What about you, Brad?
I feel great.
Are you? You feel okay? You're not feeling insecure or like you might do something irrational?
No, I feel fine.
You don't get lonely?
No, but it could change the moment I leave outside and go onto a tube full of Arsenal fans.
That could happen at any moment. I suppose, look, see, even Brad, a proper philosopher, he can't open up on camera about whether or not he feels suicidal, and even me in this situation. But let me tell you this, I've experienced all of it, haven't I? I've seen the fame, the fortune, the glory, the glamour and all of that, and I don't know, it left me feeling a little bit empty and wanting more. And for me, I've only found fulfillment and connection by being lovely to other people, whether it's Dr. Brad Evans or the people in my own family or people that are further away. I suppose compassion and love and altruism have to become a regular part of our daily diet. Look at the political landscape that we occupy, one where individualism, triumph and grandiosity are lionised, where it's being strong and stable and condemnatory and cruel and calling people mutton-headed mugwumps at the drop of a hat is considered an acceptable form of discourse, or sort of Trump's casual annihilation and alienation of huge swathes of the population. In the end, it's going to leave people feeling alienated, isolated and lost. I suppose one of the things we have to learn is to be compassionate, open, warm with each other, whether it's on a political level, social level or interpersonal level.
Absolutely.
There you go. True news. Give Brad a little kiss on the cheek. Be loving to another man today, or if you're a woman, another woman today. Or just switch it up. Do what you want, regardless of gender. Just wander into the street and kiss someone else's cat. That's some true news. Be loving. Subscribe there.